In a world where data rules, it flows unseen, silently powering everything. But beneath the surface, chaos lurk. Slow requests creep through the system. That means we need a warrior. Someone who has the technique. Here comes Next.js. More than just a framework. It is the ultimate key to harnessing data with unmatched precision and blazing speed. No more delays. Whether it's client-side fetching for instant interaction, server-side rendering for dynamic data, ISR for seamless updates, or streaming for real-time experience, Next.js places total control in your hands. These choices aren't just available, they're optimized, empowered, and limitless. Because in this race, speed is everything. In a world where milliseconds define success, where every delay is a setback, hesitation isn't an option. Ensure you share, like, and subscribe. You aren't just learning data fetching, you are mastering it, commanding it, bending it to your will. Unlock the full power of Next.js.
Welcome to the first part of our tutorial. You're going to install Next.js. It's actually easy. You can just type npx create at latest next app. Great. This should install Next.js inside your folder. I've already done that. Then you can just run npm run dev. This should start our server. The next thing we want to do, we want to actually have an API that we're going to use for data fetching. But for this tutorial, we want to keep things very simple. I'm going to actually use a free mock API, whereby you can mock without having to go through all the hassles of creating a database connection. In your browser, you can search for getServerSideProps. Great, and you select the first one. This one is going to be our place where we're going to actually have a mock API. What does a mock API means? It means this one is just for testing purposes. You can't use this for production. I'm going here inside the project and we can name it blogs. And then you can just click here, create mock server. Great job. And we have something like this. You can see we already have something here. Our API endpoints look good. I'm going to copy this. And then you can just move inside another browser and you can test this API. You can just do that and you should have a valid response. You can see we have some valid response here. So let me see. This is beautiful. That means it is working. And we are actually going to use this to test our data fetching techniques, all the data fetching techniques in the latest version of Next.js. You can see we have something here. We have an ID, a name, and an age. We can also just move back inside our Visual Studio Code, and you need to install something known as Thunder Client. We'll use this to actually test everything. So you can move inside the extensions and you can just search for Thunder Client. Great. And ensure you have this. Working with Thunder Client is actually very simple. After correct installation, Thunder Client should be visible here. Or if you cannot see it directly, you can just click on these three dots. Then you should see here. So we want Thunder Client. Good. Then I have something here. So if you've never worked with Thunder Client, yours is going to be actually empty. You can click on this hamburger menu here. And then we just want to create a new collection. This collection will be used to test everything. So you can just say data fetching. Then you just need to press enter. Right. The next step, when you hover around this collection that we have created, we can see we have some three dots here. You can just click on these three dots. Then you can just do a new request. So I can just do this, and we're going to call this request get blogs, because we have a project that is called get blogs. We can just do get blogs like this. Beautiful. And you can see we have a window here that we can actually test our API. I'm going to paste the URL that we got. So if you cannot remember, you can just move back, and then you can copy this URL. So you can just do that and then move inside your Visual Studio Code, and then you can paste it here. Great. This is our API endpoint, and ensure that the method is get here. Then you can just click send. So we tested with our browser, and we can see we have something that we are working with. This is beautiful. And you can see, anyway, it does not make, whatever we see does not make sense, but we have an ID, name, and age. But for this case, it should be good, because actually blocks does not have something like this id name. It could have something like title, content, and so forth. But for testing purposes, I'll assume this one to be our blog. Great. Another thing that I want to test is whether we can actually make some changes to this data, or even just query a single data. So let me copy the ID of this, then Control C, and then just paste it at the end. Let us try something. Let me minimize this so that it can become more visible. Ensure that you copy it at the end and just leave it, the method as get. So if we have the ID, that means we can query a single blog. I'm assuming all of these are just blogs. Great. Then you can just click send. This should bring a single blog. That means it's working beautiful. We can see we have a single blog. And another thing that we can do, if we have an ID, we can actually change some details. So I can just move here inside the body, and you can change the method to post. Whenever you are changing something or you are pushing something inside the database, the API request that you use is going to be post. Great. And then you just move inside the body, and then you're going to have some JSON inside here. And the JSON is going to have, let's say, ID, name, or age. So I can just copy this, and then I'm going to make some changes. So name, we can change from Van to something like Dan, and yeah, let's say just Daniel. And age, we can just, let's say, do something like 22. Great. And you can just leave it. Then I'm going to click send. Anyway, I think whenever we are changing something, the method should not be post. It should be actually put. Sorry for that. Posting is actually for creating something. Whenever you are creating something inside the database, you use the post method. But changing, you ensure that it is put. Or we can even do a patch. So patch can also work. So let me click send and see whether we are going to have a positive response. And if it is correct, we can see that a name has been changed. This is beautiful. This time you're getting a response. We can actually see that the name has been changed to Daniel, and the age has also been changed. Great. This is beautiful. And we're going to use this in all our case scenarios. So Mock API has saved us a lot of time. For instance, going to a database, creating a connection, and so forth, setting up Prisma and something like that. But for this case, since we're just interested with data fetching, this should be sufficient. Perfect. Let's go back inside our project, and we can start with the first major block of data fetching. The first technique we're going to learn about is static data fetching. You can just come here inside app folder here, and then we're going to create a new folder. I'm going to represent each technique using a page. So we can just start with our first technique. You can just do new folder. You're going to say static data fetching. You can just say static fetching like that. Great. And then inside it, you're going to have a new file, and you can just do a page.tsx. It's going to be a page. Good job. Then you can just, all right. After doing that, one thing we have to realize, you're using a router. And that means if you're having a page, you create it like this. The name of the folder is going to be a route, and then we have a page.tsx. So for example, if I just do RFCE here, and then inside I just say static data fetching, then this one is going to be a page. Great. And how do you move directly to this page? You'll just come inside static fetching, then like this. So let us see it. This is what I mean. This is our home page, and we have data fetching Next.js. For file-based routing, what it means, this is our home URL. So what you can do, if you just need to navigate inside this page, for static fetching, this page here, we just need to move inside the home URL and add the folder's name, which is going to be static fetching, like that. Then you just press enter. And this is going to be file-based routing in Next.js. And you can see whenever we move to this page, we already have, this is static this, we have the message from that page. This is great. That means any folder that we're going to create inside our project is going to represent a page. So for instance, you can just come here inside the app, and then you can have a new folder, and you can say test. And if you want to make this folder a page, you just need to have a file inside it, and you can just call it page.tsx. Then you can just do rfce, and then you can have test page. Great. And when we move back inside our browser, we can actually change this one to test. We can just do test here. Not testimonial, but test. That should do test. Great. And if we have a success, we should see text page here. Good. And that is file-based routing in Next.js. I have a full tutorial on Next.js if you want to master file-based routing and layouts. I'll provide the link in the description. Great. So I'm going to delete this test folder. We do not need it. And let us work on this static fetching. How do we perform a static fetch? I'm going to collapse this and enlarge it a bit. Good. Great. Static data fetching is actually used at displaying something like blog post, product, and listing. It is ideal for data that does not change. And what happens, it pre-renders the page at build time. So whenever you are actually performing a build, it's going to pre-render the data. I'm also going to delete this. I'm not going to have this type of function. Let us create our function. So we can just do export. You can even say async function and call it blog like this. And then great, you can have a function like this. In this function, we're going to fetch our API. We're going to use it to test this method of static data fetching. Great. And I want this function to have capital letters, start with capital letters. Let us look at the shape of our data. So you can just go back inside the under client. You can just click here, the under client. Then you can click on this. We can see that we have our blog has these properties, which is ID, name, and age. So we can create an interface. We'll be using TypeScript in this tutorial. So if you have installed Next.js, ensure that you select TypeScript. Great. Then you can just come here. You can just do an interface. So you can say interface. You can just say an interface blog, and it's going to have the following. It's going to have an ID, which is going to be the first property, and it's going to be a string. Another thing is it's having a name, so you can just do a name, and it's also going to be a string. Finally, we're going to have an age, which is going to be a number. Great. So we have this interface for blog. We're going to use it actually in data fetching. Let us create another function. We're going to have a function to get blog post. So we can just say async function get blog post. This is the name of our function. You can just say get blog posts like this. Then you can just have something like this. Great. And then we have to provide the type of this function get blog posts. So in TypeScript, it is necessary, but if you're working with JavaScript, you don't have to do this. In fact, you don't have to even do this when you're working with JavaScript. Great. But in TypeScript, you have to do it. So let us provide the type. It's going to be type of promise. So you can say promise. And then inside it, we're going to actually pass this block here, the type that we have defined, the interface. Great. So it's going to be of type blog post. So we can just write blog, and it's going to be an array. Inside it, we're going to perform just the data fetching functionality. So you can just move inside here, and then you can do this. We can even command fetch data from an API like this. Then you can just say constant res, which is for response. We can use a fetch. So in Next.js, you can use fetch to actually fetch data. So we can say await fetch. And inside fetch, you're going to actually pass two things. The first thing is going to be the URL. So I can just do like this, then I can put a comma here. Inside this first part, we're going to copy the URL that we had. So you can just move inside that the client. You can click search for the client. It's here. Then we need to get this URL. So we can copy this URL. This is the one that we are fetching data from. Then you can paste it inside our code. Ensure you paste it inside here. So I'm going to do that. So we are fetching it inside here. There's also another property that we want to do. So to ensure that this one is static data fetching, we have to pass one final argument. So you can just do this, and then you can say cache. And the type of cache is going to be false cache. So you can just do this. So if you add this at the final step or inside the argument, that means this one is going to be static data fetching. It's going to prefetch this data. Just as I had explained earlier, it's going to pre-render the page during build time. That means before you even display the page, at the background is going to pre-render the page. Great. And finally, we have to return the response as JSON. So we can just say return. We want to return this response here. So you can say res, but we want to return it in JSON format. So res.json like this. Good. And then we're going to use this function for fetching the API inside our function for displaying a blog. Great. Then inside this function, you can just come here, and then we need to return, as always, you can return an empty div like this. Great. So ensure you have this return here, and then inside it, you're going to declare a variable called blogs. So you can just say constant posts. So you can, instead of blog, you can just use posts, and then you can say is equals to await. And you're going to call this function above here, which is get blog post. So you can just say get blog post like that. Ensure that you have await here, this part here. So if you have an error, that means you've not declared your function as asynchronous. Great. Then inside here, you can just have a h1. Inside the h1, you can just write static data fetching like that. Great. And then inside it, we're going to have an ordered list. So you can just say ul. This one is HTML for an ordered list. And you're going to perform a function known as mapping. So we can do this. Since we are receiving this, we have just used post here. So whatever we get from this API, we have assigned it to post. So we can take this post and map it. So you can say posts.map. Great. And inside it, we're going to take an individual post. So you can have another braces inside, and then you're going to take posts, and you're going to have an arrow function inside it. So you can have something like this. So we are mapping these posts, and you can see we have a suggestion. So I can just accept this. We're mapping this post, and we're going to have inside it, you're going to have a list, and the key is going to be post.id. You can see we have the post has an ID. We know that it's going to have an ID here. And another thing, we can have post.name. Great. We can also have post.name. Inside this list, instead of just having one property like post.name, we also have an age. So you can even have post.age. So you can just do this and say post.age. Great. And this is going to work beautifully because we have name, age, and ID that we have defined here as the interface for the blog. And one beautiful thing, or one cool thing with TypeScript, so the most important thing is it has types, and that means you can catch errors even before shipping your product to or your app in production, and that is very, very good about it. Great. So for instance, if I just put here something like post.title, you can see it's going to refuse because we do not have a title property. You can see you have some red here. So when you hover, you can see the property does not exist. Great. And this is, I think, nice and a very important feature. Now that we have finished this, we can just go and check. But let me just provide some styling to this h1. So you can say do just a class name, and then we can say text is going to be to Excel. And you can also provide the color. So you can also just do text, and you can also use, let's say, color blue, green, or green, and then you can provide a value. And you can see we have some suggestion here from Tailwind. Great. And we also want the text to be at the center. So you can just do text center like this. Let us check our page and see actually the static fetching. So you can just move here, and then we know that we need to move to static fetching inside our app. So you can just click our app, ensure that you select static fetching here. So it is localhost 3000, then / static fetching. Before you test, I had forgotten to actually do something. So you can just come here. So we have export async function. We're forgetting something very important. So you can just add default like this. So it's export default async function, but this function does not have a default. Great. Because we just want this function to be accessible within this scope, but this function needs to be accessible outside this scope. Great. Then you can just move inside here, and we can see this. Beautiful. We have our title in green color, and it is centered, and we also have this. So this one is actually pre-rendered during build time. So build is when you actually run the application. At the background, it's actually going to fetch this data. Great. So one key thing you realize with static fetching is that you have just to provide this after the URL. Then you just have to provide this cache and then post no cache. And the application is in, let's say, blog posts, product listing, and so forth. Beautiful. That has been static fetching, and you can actually implement in your own project. Let us move, and then we're going to also see some other techniques. That has been the first technique. The next technique that we're going to talk about is going to be server-side fetching. So you can just move here, then new folder, ensure that you're inside the app directory, then new folder. Then you're going to call it server-side fetching. So you can just, in short form, you can just use server fetching, and it's going to represent server-side fetching. Then inside it, you're going to have, since it's going to be a page, you're going to have a page.tsx. So you can say new file, then page.tsx. Great. And we need to actually perform some server sides. So there's some things that we can reuse. For example, we had defined blog here inside static. We're going to reuse this instead of just coding again. So I can just put it here. Great. Then we're going to define a function for fetching the data in server side. Great. And what is server side fetching? It fetches data on the server at request time. It is ideal for dynamic data that changes frequently. For example, user profile and real-time analytics. Beautiful. For that purpose, we're going to fetch an individual user. I'm going to declare a function that is going to fetch an individual user here. So we can say async function get user. So just say get user. Great. Then you can just have this function here. Beautiful. So we have async function get user, but we have to actually map this function to work with these props. So at the moment, we can just change this. Instead of blog, can change it to, let's say, user, so that it can make sense. This is just for testing purposes. Great. And then you can just do the next thing we have to map. This one is going to be of type promise. Great. And we have a suggestion which is correct. It's going to be of type promise, which is a user. Great. Then inside it, we can just do as we did. Great. You can see we also have some suggestion here, but I'm not going to accept this. So we can just say constant response, and then you can provide some value. So we can fetch the same way that we did on the other side. So you can just say constant response is equals to await fetch, and inside it you're going to have two things. The first thing is going to be the URL, and the second thing is going to define the method in which this data is going to be fetched. Let us provide the URL. Great. And the next property we're going to provide is for cache, and it's going to be cache no store. So inside curly braces, you can say cache, and then it's going to be no store. Beautiful. We have cache no store. So whenever we have this argument or this parameter here that has been passed as an object, that means it's going to fetch the data every time. Great. Another thing you want to do, since we are going to fetch an individual user, so we are just using the same URL. This is just for testing purposes. In production, you can have a real URL for a user. So I'm going to change this one to backticks. Then we can add an ID. So you can just do backticks here. And then inside it, you can provide an ID. So you can just do / and inside curly braces, you can just do an ID. And show you have a $sign here. So you can just add a $sign, and that should change the color. So if it has changed the color like this, that means you have provided the ID correctly. Then at the end, we just want to return response. So you can just say return response.json. Great. And so you have that. And that is beautiful. Our function is complete. So we are getting an individual user. We are using this the mock URL that we've been given just for testing purposes. And at the end, you're passing an ID, and we want it to have cache no store. That means it's going to fetch every time. Great. And we actually saw this inside the client, but let us just see it again. We saw that we were able to fetch an individual user or a blog. Great. Let us declare another function here that is going to consume the above function. So we can just say export, ensure that you have default because we want it to be available in also other scope of this application. But the function is also going to be asynchronous, so you can also add async. So it's going to be export default function async, and it's going also to be called. So we can actually call this get user data or user data. It doesn't matter the name that you give it. For instance, we can even say user page like this. Great. And then like that. Then you can just have a return inside this function. You can just do a return and then pass a div inside it. And we're also going to pass some parameters inside this, or some arguments inside this function user page. Great. So you can just come here inside this user page, and you need to pass in the ID. So you can say params. We need to destructure the params, so you can just do this params like this, and you can also have params, and their type of can have an ID which is a string. Great. Another thing that we see, we need to pass an ID to this function getUser. So inside it, you can just have an ID and then provide a type which is going to be a string. Great. So whenever we pass in the ID, that ID is going to be passed at the end of the URL in order to fetch the individual blog. Great. Or the individual user. Perfect. Then after destructuring the params, we need to use this ID inside our project. So you can just come below it. We need to declare a variable called user. So you can say constant user is equals to, so this one is going to be an individual user. You can say await as always. And when you say await, it means it's going to take some time. And then you're going to call this function here getUser. So you can say getUser. And inside it, so if I just leave it like this, you can see that we have a red mark here. That means we have an error, and you can see that we have an argument that is missing. Great. So it expects at least one argument, which is this ID of user. So we need to pass it in here. So you can just say params.id. Beautiful. So we are passing in the params.id. So whenever we pass in the params, it's going to be passed at the end, and we're going to fetch an individual user. Good. Then inside here, we can just render the individual user. Before rendering, you can have an h1 tag. So you can just do h1, and then we can say server side, so that you can know whatever you're doing in this page, server side data fetching or server side rendering. And yeah, you can choose whatever you want. So it's server side rendering. Great. And then after that, you're going to map over the user. So you can move below it, and instead of mapping, you can even have something as simple as, for example, you can have h2 here, and you can have user.name, and you can also have, let's say, a paragraph, and you can say user.age, and you can add something like years old. Great. That is beautiful because we have this data. Perfect. And let us actually test this. So how can we test this? We need to move inside this page here. So you can move inside this page. We can just grab any ID. For instance, we can just move inside under client, and I need to grab any ID. So you can ensure you have any ID. For instance, when you have this ID, we should have the name, Daniel, and we can have an age like this. This is great. One last thing is that we notice this one is this page is going to be dynamic. So we need to make this page dynamic. At the moment, it's not dynamic since we're actually going to pass an ID here, and we are fetching data from params in this static data fetching. You can see we are using some params here. That means this page is going, it needs to be dynamic. What we can do, we can just move inside server-side fetching, and then we can create a new folder, and then we can just call it ID. This folder is going to be dynamic. So you can do like that. Then inside it, you can grab this page.tsx and just move it inside this ID folder. Great, and then you can just click move. Perfect. So we have server-side fetching, and then we have the ID, then we have this page here. And that's how you declare dynamic pages in Next.js. You just use square braces or square brackets, and then you pass in the ID. In documentation, you'll see something like slug, but slug and ID just means a dynamic segment. Great. That means we can test our application. But to test this application, we need an ID. So I can grab any here. So I can just come here and then grab any ID. For example, I'm going to grab this ID, and then we can add inside our page. Beautiful. So you have this localhost 4000, then you move inside server fetching, and then you need to paste the ID at the end. Great. So when we do this, you can see we have this server-side rendering. Let me give it some styling so that it can become at least more beautiful a bit. So inside server-side fetching, you can come here, and then inside this h1, you can just do a class name, and text is going to be, let's say, 3XL, and then you can provide some color and say test, let's say yellow, and you're going to give it a value, for instance 400, and we want the text to be at the center, so you can just say text, let me do this, text center. Great. We have this stylings, text a little bit larger, and this color, and we want it to be at the center. Then you can just check in our application, and you can see the text is yellow and it's at the center. That is beautiful. And we are fetching this dynamic data here. So we have the name, and we also have the age. This is great. But the most important thing is you have also learned that this one is a dynamic path or a dynamic route. And that's how we declare dynamic route. And this one is going to be server-side fetched. Great. And we can see it, we are fetching it at every individual step. So every time that you fetch data, it's going to run this. Cache no store means that data is fetched on every request. That means we will have a fresh data on each time you make a request. Great. And this has been on server-side fetching. The next technique is client-side fetching. So you can just come here inside the folder, then you're going to create a new folder to represent client-side fetching. So you can say new folder, and you're going to call it client fetching. Great. Then inside it, you can just have a new file, and you can call it page.tsx. It's going to be a page, as always, page.tsx. Great. And inside it, you can just do RFC at the moment. And then you need to delete import React from React. And since it's a client component, we need to mark it as client. To mark it as client, you can just do this, use client above here. The question comes here. What is the difference between a client component and a server component? Normally, as a client component is, let's say, a page that uses mostly React hooks, and it runs on the client side. And the server component runs on the server side. For example, if you're using something that is going to be shown to the user, for example, you're using useEffect or you're using useState and all those React hooks, you need to mark your component as useClient. But if you're fetching just data, for example, in these two pages that you have created for this one, server fetching and static fetching, all these are server components. And client components must be declared like this useClient. So if you don't declare it as useClient, the compiler assumes that it is a server component. Great. Let us dive in. Client data fetching, what it does, it fetches data on the client side after the page loads. And when is it ideal? It's actually ideal for data that needs to be updated frequently. For example, a real-time, something that is working on real-time notification, or let's say you have a live feed. Great. Let us see it in action. Inside this page, you can just have a h1 and you can say you can write client-side data fetching. Great. Let us provide some styling. So you can just do a class name and the text is going to be at least bigger. So you can say text, you want it to be 2XL, and you also can give it some color. You can even say a text amber and can provide a color of 600 and want the text to be centered like that, text center. So you can have client side fetching, and you can also check this. So you can move here and we need to move inside client fetching. So you can move inside your browser and then you can provide the URL here as client fetching. Great. And you should see something like this. That means our page has been created successfully. Let us add more functionality to it. We're going to have an interface of user, so we can just copy this interface that we had used here, this one here. You can copy it and we're going to reuse inside our client fetching. And then you can copy it here at the top like this, so that you can have an interface of user with all these properties. We're also going to use some React hooks. So you need to import useState. You're going to use useState and useEffect. So you can say import useState and useEffect. And you're importing it from React. So ensure you have imported these two React hooks. Right. Then you can just come here inside this function just before the return. And you can see we have some suggestion, which is correct. I'm going to accept this suggestion. So we have constant user and a function to set the user, which is set user. And we are using useState. And at the moment we have null, so we do not have a user. Great. And then below it, you're going to have useEffect. useEffect hook from React. So you can do this. Inside it, you're going to have an arrow function like this. Great. Then you just need to drop this one here. As you can see, we have a suggestion, which is we want to fetch and then set the response. I'm going to accept this suggestion, but I'm also going to make some tweaks. So the URL, we need to change this URL to our URL. So you can move inside the client and then we can copy this URL that we had created here, and then we just need to move back inside our application. And then you can change this URL, so you can paste it here. Great, like this. So after fetching the data from the URL, we want to set our response with the data. Great. It's also a nice practice if you can have a .catch. This one is for catching errors. So you can have a .catch like this, and inside it you can pass an error, and then you can console the error like that. But you're not going to do this. This is just for demonstration, but in practice, you should have something like that. Great. The next thing, we have to set the fetched user data. So we can also have a .then here. So you can do .then, and you can see we have a suggestion. I'm going to accept this. We want to set the data with the data. As you can see, we are using this function set user that we had declared above here to actually set the data. Great. So after fetching the data, we are setting the JSON response inside this users array here. Great. And you're not going to have dependencies. When you're working with useEffect, you have to provide dependencies here just at the end or be after these curly braces. So you can just do comma here, and then you can have an empty array. You're not going to have a dependency. So what do dependencies do? For example, if I have an ID here, that means this function is going to run every time we have an ID. Great. Let us now use this inside our function just here. So you can just come inside this div. Since we know that our user is of type array like this, you can see we have a user is of type array. That means we can map this array. So you're going to use this. So you can say users dot map. Great. Users, these users that we have defined here. Then inside it, you're going to have an individual user. So you can just do user and then an arrow function like this. Then we're going to have a list. This is list from HTML. So the basic HTML element for a list. And for us to use a map function, we need to provide the key property. So inside the list, you can just say key, and then we can say user.id can be the key. Great. And before we map this, we want to actually wrap this map function inside an ordered list. So you can have ul like this from HTML, and then we need to wrap everything with ul. So I can cut this, and after here, just after mapping, we need to actually have this inside a list. Great. Inside the list, we can map the names. So we can say inside the h2 like this, you can say user.name. Ensure that you're using curly braces, user.name. Great. And we can also have a p tag like this, and inside it we can render another property of a user. So you can say user dot, and you can see we have suggestion here. This is based on the props. So we have the name, we can also have the ID here, or the age here. Great. And this one is based on these user props that we had used above here. Great. You can also style this a user. Let's say the name, you can provide some class name. This is not necessary, but I think it's important you know how to style. So we can just do a text, like we want a text, let's say a green color. So you can provide a green color, and you can choose any value. Let's say green for 100. And you want the text also to be centered. So you can say text center like that. Great. You can also provide some styling to this age. For example, I want the age to be bold, and I can just say font and then bold. Alternatively, I can have, let's say, something like this age, or user age is, and then like that. Then we can render the user age. Let us check this page out. So this one has been client-side fetching, whereby we are using useEffect. So whenever you fetch data on client side, you need to use useEffect, and you need to ensure that you have marked your page as client like this. Great. So we'll navigate inside this page, client fetching, inside our browser. On checking, I've seen that we have reached our limits, but it's okay. I'm going to create another one. I'm going to create another API endpoint. As I told you earlier, this is just for testing purposes. In reality, or in real life, you want to use something like a database connection. Great. Since we are having a challenge in that we have reached the maximum usage of this free database URL that you've been given here, this URL that we are using, how can we get around this? We can do this. You can just move inside your folder, then you're going to create a folder known as API. We're going to use our own mock database. So you can say new folder, and then you're going to call it API. And this is the way you create APIs in Next.js. So you usually enclose them inside an API folder. Then inside it, we're going to have the path. So you can also have another nested data folder, and we're going to call it, let's say, mock database. Mock. Great. And then inside it, since it's a route, you're going to have a file with the name of route.ts. Great. So we are creating this file for us to mock our database. And this is the way you do it. for all API routes, they must have this naming like this, route.ts. So in APIs, you don't have anything like page.tx. It's all about route. So it's route.ts. If you're using JavaScript, it is route.js. Great. Then inside here, we can just import next response. So you can just do import next response. Great, like that. And then you can declare a function that is going to be used. So we can say export async function get. Ensure that get is in capital letters. So get here in capital letters, we can get like this. Great. Inside it, we can just define like constant users is equals to, which is going to be an array. And then we're just going to return next response .json, and we are going to return users like that. Great. So it is JSON. Let us provide some users here. So I'm going to provide some users, and we forgot to put a function here. So it is export async function like this. Great, just like that, and you are done. Therefore, this is our mock database. Instead of relying on getServerSideProps for it to give us some free API test, we can just use our own. So I'm going back inside client fetching, and then I need to change the URL. So I'm only going to change this part. You can change this part. I'm going to do this like this, and then inside it, I need to provide the path. As you can see, it is inside API folder, and this is the way you do it. So it's /API, and then we have / inside the API, we are going inside mock database. So you can just say mock database. Ensure that the naming is correct. If you even misspell it, it's not going to work. Great, and this should work. All right, after that quick fix, let us look in our application. Great. You can see inside localhost 3000 / client fetching, we have this title and the name is in green. So we have John Doe age. So the age is 30. So instead of user is, we can say user age here. This is just for aesthetic properties. You can say user age like this. Great. And it's working beautifully. So you can say user age. Yes, user age is 30, John Doe. You can provide some more styling so that it can look better. But for this tutorial, it's just about data fetching. And this one is about client-side data fetching. Great. So you have learned how to create your own API in Next.js. I also have a recent video on how to work with REST API in Next.js, how to perform create, read, and update API. You can have a look at it. I'll also provide a link in the description. Great. The next technique for data fetching is incremental static regeneration. So you can just move inside this folder, inside app folder, and then you're going to create a new file or a new folder that is going to actually show incremental static regeneration. So you can just call it ISR fetching like that. And then inside it, we need to have a new file, page.tsx. It's going to be a page.tsx. That. Great. As always, we're going to have an interface just the same that we have been using. So we have a user has an ID, a name, and an age. Great. And you're going to also declare a function to get the user. So we can say export async function. It's going to be an asynchronous function, and we're going to call the function get user. So you can say get user like this. The next thing, we have to provide the type of this function. So you can just come here after this get user, then we need to say it's actually going to be a promise. As you can see, I have a suggestion here. Great. It is of type promise, and it's going to actually use this interface. It's going to have this type of interface. Great. Another thing you want to do, if you want suggestions like that, you can just move inside under client here, not actually inside these extensions. So you can just click here, and then you can look for extensions. Then you can search for Beto like this, and then you can select the first one and install. Great. That one should give you some actually AI auto completion or code auto completion. Great. And then inside it, we're going to declare a variable called response, just the same as we did earlier. You can just have response, constant response is equal to await. It's going to take some time. Await fetch like this. Great. And as you can see, we need to provide, since we have created a mock database for usage, you can just move here, and then inside it you can have something like this, /. So we are moving inside the API folder, so it's /API. And then after you enter the API folder, you need to move inside the mock database. So we provide another /mock database. Great. And you are there. So therefore, this is the URL. Great. So you move inside this URL to fetch the users. Great. To resolve this error here, so you can just do return response.json. So you can just do return, then res.json. Res here. So res.json. Great. We also need to it is export async function. So you can say async function like this. Great. And then it's going to be an array. So instead of a single user, just an array of users. And the user is in small letters, user, because our interface we have used is small letters. So you can just change to small letters like that. And our error is actually resolved. Another thing, this function does not need to be exported because we do not want to export it to other parts of our application. So you can just remove the export part. Great. The next function that we're going to declare is going to need export. So we're going to have export async. It's going to be an asynchronous function, and you can provide it any name, a name like users page, like this. Great. Inside this function, we can just have a return, and we're going to return just an empty div like this. Great. You also need to declare a variable called users. So you can see we have a suggestion which is correct. So you have constant users is equals to await get users. Great. And since we know this user is an array, we can map inside our div. Before we map, we can just have a h1, and then we can say this is ISR fetching. Great. Great. The next thing you want to ensure for ISR, we need to actually provide a URL like this. The one that we've used is just a relative URL. So ensure that it starts with http localhost 3000/API/mock database. Great. Another thing you can add, you can just put an export here. Great. And then inside this part, we need to just do a basic mapping. So we can just map like this. You can say, as you can see, we are getting users. So, and users is an array here. That means you can map it. You can do this users.map like that. Then inside it, we need to get an individual user like this. And then you can just have an arrow function at the end. Great. And inside it, we can have something like this. We can show the user's age or even the user's name. We can use a list from HTML. So you can have a list like this. And then inside it, I'm going to accept the suggestion. We can render an age or a name. Great. And for mapping, we need to provide a key. So inside it, you can say key, and then we need to say user.id is going to be the key. So if you don't use the key, you're going to get an error. Great. And we can test our application. Before we test our application, let me just provide some styling to this h1. So you can just do h1 text3xl -3xl, and you can just provide a color like orange. You can choose any intensity. Great. And then we want the text to be at the center, so you can just do text center. And we need to wrap this list or this mapping function inside an ordered list. So this one is not necessary, but I think it's just good you do it. So you can have a UL here, and then you can wrap our map function. So you can wrap like this, and then you can have it like this. Great. Then we can just test our application. All right, we have this. We have ISR fetching and this, but this is just normal fetching. How can we make this on ISR fetching? The way we make this on ISR fetching is we need to provide here another argument inside the fetch. So you can just add an argument like this with curly braces, then you can say next, then inside it you can have revalidate, and you can provide a value, let's say 60 seconds. So what does this mean? It means that this data is going to be fetched every 60 seconds. Great. And this is the basis of ISR fetching. You are providing a timeline in which you want data to be fetched. You can even provide a timeline of 1 hour, let's say 36. You can even do at 3600 seconds. So the value that you give here is in seconds. Great. So let us test our application, and let us just do 60, and then let us see. Refresh. It should work, but in reality, this data is going to be updated every 60 seconds. Great. How can we test this? Let us make some changes, and then let us see if it's going to reflect in real life. Great. Let me move back here and refresh. And you can see, for example, John Doe has an age of 30. Great. Let us change something here. So, all right, so I can just do this and say name, and then age is like this. All right, this is just for aesthetic purposes. Great. And let us just have a look. Yeah, we have it here. The name is John Doe. All right. And then I think you need to put a colon here also, like this. Great. Let us check. So we have name is John Doe and age is 30. So we want to manipulate John Doe's age. And then you may be asking a question, why did we put a UL here? And what will happen if we do not put a UL here? So let us see. If we don't put a UL here, we're going to have the dot before everything is actually rendered. Great. You can see that we have a dot, then this property dot, and this property. I don't think this looks beautiful, and let us just return the way it was. Great. And it should look like this without the dots. Great. And when is the best case to use ISR? These are the cases when you need to use ISR. We have covered all the aspects of data fetching in Next.js. The next thing is to look at something like streaming, what it is and actually how to implement it, and what is the relevance of streaming in data fetching. So you can just come here inside the app folder, and you're going to create a new folder, and you can just call it streaming. Okay, or streaming data, like that. Then inside it, I'm going to make this a page, so we can just do a new file, and then you can call it page.tsx, like that. Great. The question is this: have you ever tried to load a page and you've seen a message loading before the page is rendered? So for instance, if you want to implement something like loading before your component loads, you can do it using streaming in Next.js. Let us implement it. So we want to show a loading. We want to actually show loading before the data is actually displayed. You're first going to have a function to fetch data. So you can just say async function fetch data, like this. This function is going to fetch the data that we need. Great. And inside it, we can just do as we did. We can declare a variable called response. So you can just do constant response. Great. And then you can just say is equals to await fetch, and then we need to pass in the URL. So you can just pass the URL here. So I'm going to copy the URL that we use, let's say here in ISR streaming. So you can just use this one, localhost 3000 / mock database. Great. So you can just move here, and then inside I'm going to paste it. You can just do this. Great. So we are fetching data from this, and then we can just return our response.json. So return is res, but in JSON format. Great. Let us import actually whatever we were using for our data. So you can just move back, let's say inside ISR fetching, and we can copy this interface that we are using here. since you're going to use this interface. Instead of writing it again, it should save us some time. So we can just paste it here at the top. Great. Another thing that we want to do, we want to provide the type of this function here, fetch data. Since we already have this user, let me use capital letter because that is the best practice when declaring an interface. Then you can just do this and say is equals to a promise. So you can just do a promise and it's of type the user. Great. We're going to accept this, but ensure that the user is actually an array like that. Perfect. Let us declare another function and we're going to call it streaming component. So you can say function streaming component, and inside it we can just return an empty div. So you can move inside this function streaming component, then we need to have a return like that, and then just put a div here. Great. We need to actually declare another variable called users. So you can just say constant users, then is equal to, then we need to call this function fetch data. So you can just say await, and then you just say fetch data like that. Perfect. All right, we do not actually need this await, so you can just delete this await here. Great. So we have constant users is equals to fetch data, and inside here we can just render the users. Since we know that the user is an array as we have specified here from the type, we can actually just do some mapping. So we can just use a ul like that, and then inside it we can map. So we need to say users dot map, and inside it we're going to have an individual user and an arrow function inside, and inside it we can have, I'm going to accept this, you can have user.name. Great. All right, let us actually declare this function as async. So you can just say export async, so that we can use await here. So we can say constant users is equals to await is actually needed, so we have await fetch data like that. That should be a fix. Great. And then inside it we have just rendered the user.name. Great. At this moment let us just render user.name, but if you want to render something else you can just include it here. Great. The next step, we're going to declare another function called streaming page. So you can just move below here, and then you can declare another function here. So you can say export default function, and then you can call it stream page. Great. So we have this function export function stream page. This function is going to call the stream component. But before we call the stream component, we actually need to involve another component in React, or another library known as Suspense. So at the top, just here at the top, let me collapse this. At the top, we can have something like this. We need to import Suspense. So you can say import Suspense from React. Great. We're going to wrap our stream component using this Suspense. So you can come here, and then we're going to have Suspense like this, and it's a component. Ensure you do it like this. Great. And inside here we can just have our stream component here. Great. As you can see, I don't have the correct spelling for streaming component, so ensure that it is G, and then also here is streaming, the G here. Great. So we are calling our streaming component and we're wrapping it inside a Suspense. All right, the next thing we need to do is inside this Suspense we need to provide a prop known as fallback. So you can just do this fallback like this, and then we can just have a p tag from native HTML like this, and then inside it you can just say loading. Great. And then dot dot like that. Before we test our application, inside this div we can just have this function, or rather a h1 tag, and you can say like this, just h1. You can provide a title and say this is streaming when data fetching. Great. Let us also provide some stylings, which is optional, but you can do this. So you can say text 3xl, and then we want the color to be, let's say, red, and you can choose a value, let's say 400, and we want the text to be center. So you can just do a text center like that. One final thing, we have to ensure that this function stream page has a return. So you can just do a return like this, and then inside it we can just have an empty div as always, and then we're going to wrap all this. So you can copy this or cut it and then place it inside. Great. Ensure that you place it inside. So our suspense is wrapped inside a div and it's inside a return function. Great. You can also delete this part because we do not need it. Perfect. And we can test our application. So when you move inside our browser, you can just ensure that you're inside localhost 3000 / streaming data. So I can enlarge this. Great. So ensure that you're using this path, streaming data. And when we refresh, we can actually see something. We are seeing this text here, loading, which is very good. That means that is streaming in Next.js. And for a more complex way, you can actually design a streaming component yourself. And that streaming component should be rendered before the data is shown, or when the data is loading in the background. Another thing we can actually do, we can also provide some styling to this loading. So you can even just do a class name like this, and then let's say text. You can even have let's say text of green, and you can choose a value, let's say of 500, and then you can say text center. Great. And when we refresh, so you need to refresh the page, and you can see this. So you can see loading, it's at the center of the page. It's actually happening so quickly. You can see loading. Great. So you can provide, you can just do any styling that you want. And that has been the complete data fetching technique and the best uses for each data technique. Great. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, you can just put them in the comment section below.